Back to Ranger in Depth. Today we are talking about the skill Flow Bypassing Wind. This is a new core ability that links all your bow damage together, and it's essentially the old cancel form of Charging Wind that's been taken out and given its own skill. So Bypassing Wind still procs the add-on for Charging Wind, which is T3, and it gives its own 10% critical hit rate buff. And of course, as native skill buffs and add-ons always stack, you can get up to 40% from Charging Wind by putting the 30% add-on with 10% from Bypassing Wind, and you'll get both. The skill has two different forms, the stationary, like this, and the backwards, which will look like this. So you will take a step back and fire the skill, and in both cases you are able to fully charge Tearing Arrow by inputting S and E during the Bypassing Wind animation, and this Tearing Arrow will be fully charged, which is the core for Tearing Arrow cycling, which will be important later. So now let's go into all the inputs for Bypassing Wind. The first one is a stationary input, and you will do left mouse, right mouse, and the auto attack will be cancelled by Bypassing Wind. This is called the auto cancel Bypassing Wind, and it's my favorite type of Bypassing Wind to do from a wall because it doesn't cost any cooldowns except Bypassing Wind, and it doesn't move me. Next four forms are going to come from Blasting Gust. So the first form is technically also stationary, and it is sideways Blasting Gust Bypassing Wind. You'll do left or right with left mouse and just input the right mouse as you're moving. So I said this is stationary because it uses the stationary Bypassing Wind animation, but technically you're also sliding from the Blasting Gust. Next form is backwards Blasting Gust, which gives you the backstep form of Bypassing Wind. So you do S, L, and B and input R and B as you're going backwards. This will give you the backstep version of Bypassing Wind. This form is going to be stationary Blasting Gust Bypassing Wind, which we went over as well in the Gust video. So it's Q, L, and B, and Shift R and B instead of just R and B to input the Bypassing Wind, and this is also stationary. Quick note, if you remember from the Blasting Gust video, the Awakening C-Swap going backwards is also the same animation as stationary Blasting Gust, so you'll also be able to get this Bypassing Wind cancel from that. Next form of Blasting Gust Bypassing Wind is going to be Pinpointing Gust. If you remember again from the Blasting Gust video, Pinpointing Gust, whether it's from Tearing Arrow or Fury Arrow or Pinpoint itself, all three forms share the same Bypassing Wind cancel, so you'll hit Q and Shift R and B to get Bypassing Wind. Alright, next we'll go over Razor Wind Bypassing Wind. The first thing we're going to go over is just canceling straight out of Razor Wind with Bypassing Wind. You're going to do B to get into Razor Wind stance, start shooting with L and B, and just add R and B at any time. You'll cancel the shooting of Razor Wind with Bypassing Wind. Fluff mechanic that you can do is hold down left mouse and right mouse button and tap E rapidly. Your character will do a funky little shuffle dance. I don't see any real value in this besides the aesthetics, but hey, it's cool. Why it's a fluff mechanic. Next thing is going to be getting the backstep Bypassing Wind out of Razor Wind, which happens if you're not shooting when you input the Bypassing Wind key, which is R and B during E, but you're not shooting, so no L and B. So you'll immediately exit Razor Wind and do a backstab Bypassing Wind. Another fluff mechanic, if you hold the R and B and tap E, your character will enter and instantly exit Razor Wind animation, and you'll be able to Bypassing Wind repeatedly. Again, not exactly that useful, but it's cool. Alright, now let's go over Tearing Arrow Bypassing Wind. Like with Razor Wind, you can either get a backstep or stationary cancel Bypassing Wind, depending on whether you were shooting at the time. If you are holding left mouse button, when you hit right mouse button, you will cast the stationary bypassing wind. And if you let go of left mouse button at any time before hitting right mouse button during the tearing arrow animation, you'll cast the backstab bypassing wind. As bypassing wind full charges tearing arrow, you can repeat this cancel forever. Holding left mouse button for the stationary bypassing wind is possible until the end of the final recoil animation of the final shot of tearing arrow, and you will have a slight backwards movement, which guarantees that you get the full damage from tearing arrow and the cancel for the next cast, though at a cost of losing some of your positioning. Whether this trade is worth it is situational. Sometimes you do not get the recoil though, and your character simply stops, sometimes freezing outright and displaying "please try again later." This is a persistent bug that has not been fixed since the game first launched, and it gets worse and worse the worse the game's conditions are, such for example in a pitch fight with many players around. For this reason, I'd suggest that you limit your bypassing wind cancel from tearing arrow to just 3 or 4 ticks of tearing arrows in a crowded fight, and just let go of the damage from the final shot for the sake of consistency. Right, and the last form, most basic, most commonly used form of bypassing wind is going to be after penetrating wind. Anytime after penetrating wind, if you add Shift R and B, you will get bypassing wind. So this all forms of penetrating wind, it's a way to cut the recoil animation short, as well as apply the charging wind add-on again. So very basic PvP combo would be kick cancel, penetrating wind into bypassing wind, and tearing arrow to finish off. As you might imagine, we are going to go into penetrating wind in great detail later, so please look out for that video as well. It will be in the same playlist. And with that, we are done with bypassing wind, and I will see you on the next one.